gets into a relationship for it to fail. Nobody starts a project or a business or family or something that they believe in for it to fail.
They don't, but a lot of people get into relationships for the wrong reasons. And that's when I say wrong, I mean for a lack of wisdom as in what they are doing. When you go into a relationship unconsciously, and I mean unconsciously, like without really defining the lines, you know, without really being clear on who you are.
And with no real intention too, would you
right,
say that too?
Absolutely, absolutely, with no real intention other than, oh, I feel good, he or she looks good, they make me feel this way, they do this for me, they do that for me, they blah, 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 blah. It's like, okay, I get how you get that on the surface. You know, but that is just that very surface. If you go into a relationship with surface views, with shallow views, then you're going to swim in shallow water, which means you're not swimming, you're on your belly. And there's a little bit of, you know, water over your back, and you feel like but you're not in the sea, you're not in the pool, you're not where you can spread your arms and do different strokes and have these different experiences within that abyss of water. Water, you know, that is like emotion, it's a symbology of emotion also. But also being an energy of transformation, of adaptability, of being able to, you know, when water is flowing, water conforms to whatever it goes into.
That's correct. It takes the shape of whatever it's put into.
But it does not change.
That's right. It's still water.
It's all its properties, and it's everything that makes water stays water, no matter what you put it in. And that's how we have to go into our relationships.
And we have to be willing to adapt. And we have to be willing to compromise. And like I said in the last show where we ended up, everything is not about you. And you have to take it outside of yourself, because, you know, if you allow everything to become about you, you're going to take so many things personal, and you're going to make these big old mountains out of what is really a molehill and what is really nothing at all. You know, sometimes the person might have just had a bad day. Sometimes something might have just happened right before they came in that completely shook them. And they come in with an attitude, and you take it personal. Instead of maybe taking the time to ask, to communicate, you know, are you okay? You know, to hear them with compassion, to show them some affection. You know, like, okay, you might need a hug too, but give that what you want to receive. Give them the hug in the moment. You know, it's
just like the 70-30 that I brought up in one of our topics. 70% is who you are at your core.
Right.
That is your fundamental belief.
Right.
30% is about style. It's about your personal way of expressing yourself. And that's what has to be adaptable. So for me, that's the analogy of the water being adaptable, but staying true to itself is the 70-30. Be true to yourself in a relationship, but be able to adapt to what is not affecting your core. Water is when you pour it into something, it's not going to change its properties because it's going into something. And if it's going down to a stream, and if you try to put up a dam or something, if there's any crack in it, water is going to find a way out of it. And to me, that's how I see spirit. When we're at our core, when we don't change our core, allow our core to be affected, and we operate from that truth, when something comes to block us, if there's any holes in that, if that's not a pure thing, in other words, we're going to find it. Spirit is going to lead us right on through that, and we will continue moving.
Right. Absolutely. And there's two things I want to bring here. I don't know which one to say first. When you come into a relationship with a person, they're going to be a certain way. And a lot of people say, oh, you changed. They've been married for 20 years now, or together for 20 years, or in this relationship for 20 years. Oh, you changed. You're not the same person.
Thank God.
Thank you. Exactly. That's exactly what I was going to say. Thank God they are not the same person. Do you realize that the person that you were last month, in terms of your physical structure, your body, that you're not that same person? You have new cells. The blood has been redone in your eyes. You might have been able to see a little bit better last week.
Or a little bit worse.
you saw a little bit better last week than you do this week. Our bodies are constantly changing.
You know, they
Life
actually-
is constantly changing.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, babe.
That's okay.
You know, they actually say that you're on a, like what you're talking about at a cellular level, that our bodies are renewed every 7 years.
Yeah,
Every
yeah.
7, it takes 7 years.
Right.
Every 7 years, our body's in a cycle.
That's correct.
And we are actually a new physical person, even though you don't realize it. I'm
Well,
sorry
well,
to interrupt.
That's okay. Well, and a good visual of that is a baby to who I am now. Who I was as a baby, I don't even have that same body anymore. That's not even the same body. This is a completely different body. But we're so opposed to change. We think change is such a bad thing. But change is not a bad thing. You have to be able to embrace change and receive change and desire change. Because, even with relationships, if something isn't working for you now, you have to be willing to change it or have it change. Because if your relationship is in a state right now where you feel like it's over or you're wondering how you can save it, the first thing that you need to do is say, you know what? Something needs to change.
Well, you know why we tend to be fearful of change and fearful of the unknown because we don't know ourselves. When our core is strong and our fundamentals are not there, then that is what makes us have a difficult time with moving through change. When we know who we are, we can accept whatever comes with more grace and more ease because we have a foundation of truth. We have a foundation of knowing who we are, and knowing who we are means we have all the fundamental components that create a strong center.
Right.
And we're prepared for the storms.
And like you said, a lot of people will say they're fearful of what they don't know, but that's not really the truth. Because if you don't know it, you can't be afraid of it. In actuality, what is going on is you are fearful of what you project what you don't know to be. Because if you don't know what it is, how are you going to be afraid of it? You're afraid of what you anticipate or think or expect that it might be. So if
your worst fears start to come to surface.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The things that you focus on are the things that you draw to yourself. So in relationships, a lot of people, one of the biggest fears in a lot of relationships is that they're going to be abandoned or they're going to be rejected, left alone. The person is going to leave them for someone else. They're going to be unfaithful. They're going to be abusive. They're not going to be attentive. They're not going to love them in 5 years. And so they end up having those same experiences of the things that they're afraid of because we tend to focus on these things.
Absolutely.
On a regular basis. The minute you don't hear from him or you text him and he doesn't respond back, or you text her and she doesn't respond back, first thing you start thinking, who they with, what they doing, and so if you keep creating this, I tell people all the time, something doesn't need to be there for you to find it. It really doesn't, because we have great imaginations. And so it's like me saying to you, nah, you see the star in the wall over there? And you're like, no, I don't see it. Yes, it's right there. It's a star. I'm seeing the star. You're not seeing the star because I'm convinced that there's a star in the wall. You don't see the star. So we can absolutely create things that are not necessarily
in our own perception. That's not necessarily in the collective objective reality.
Absolutely.
Absolutely, I completely agree. And going back to the responsibility, we have to take responsibility for what is being presented in our presence, in our circle, in our space, in that moment.
Absolutely.
The situation that I was dealing with recently, what came to my awareness through doing the work over the last couple of days was that somewhere in there, I didn't take the responsibility for my part. I allowed frustrations to build and come to surface, and I allowed myself to be in the story.
Girl, let's talk about that story.
In the story without being aware. It's okay, you're in the story when you're actively participating anyway, but to live inside of the story, you have to be more of an observer that is a part of the observation of the story.
Right.
Really being inside of that and having a disconnect from the divinity that is in process is what creates more drama, what creates more problems.
Yeah.
And so me not taking the responsibility, number one, the energy that was present and the residual energy that I have transmuted through the years, there's still a little of that in there. And when you don't own where you are now and really sit and trust in that, the very thing that happens is this energy of the past, the thing that you had laid to rest, wants to start coming back and seducing you into, see, you have to do this in order to have this. And you want to start micromanaging the situation instead of just accepting the properties that are available in front of you, meaning looking at what is actually happening, stepping into the responsibility of, and again, we repeat this, but what is love asking of me? I did not revert to that question of self-examination in that moment because I was emotionally shook. Pains from not that current situation, but just as imprinted in the programming of my experiences. And even though I've done a lot of work for many years and I've grown from that, we are all vulnerable to being triggered to those things that still have a residual presence.
And sometimes we don't see things on the surface. What's coming to mind right now is like mold. Okay, so mold can be extremely harmful.
Right.
So mold can appear on the surface and you see the mold and you take the cleanser and you do what you need to, but there might have been some mold that was in the cracks.
Right.
And you were not able to get to the cracks, but the mold is still in the cracks. And because it's in the cracks, it's going to manifest out. It's going to continue to grow. You have not cleansed everything. And so your intention was to clean everything, but you didn't see it or you were not aware that it was there.
Right.
But when it presents itself and you're like, oh, but I cleaned the surface. Well, there must be something underneath then that I'm not seeing. So I need to dig a little deeper. I might need to get a chisel or a jackhammer and bring everything up in order to cleanse it completely. And I'm a firm believer that sometimes we can't handle everything coming up at the same time.
Right.
It's too much work or it takes too much effort. You know, maybe you have bad heart or problems breathing. So, you know, you're not going to see everything in the beginning to be able to clean it because then you're going to get in there and really want to clean it. And you're not in a position where your body is able to handle that right then. So everything is a process and we have to understand that. But like you talked about the story, and I want to talk about the story because we all have a story.
Indeed we do.
And we all tell our story. And sometimes we tell the story. Yeah, and sometimes we tell the story over and over again.
Oh my God, yes.
But even as we change, even as things change, stories change and stories can change. Even as we decide we want to be better. Okay, so we decide we want to be better, but we still continue to hold on to the same old story that has contributed to us being in the state that we're in. I had a very, very profound exercise that came to me intuitively to do. Because my story always was with regards to my childhood, and in particular my relationship with my dad. And we're talking about relationships here, and like I said, we're not just talking about intimate relationships. I want you to see what we're saying and apply it to whatever relationship you're struggling in right now.
We're talking about the core. The core of a thing.
Exactly. And so with my dad, it always was that, you know, I didn't get a lot of affection from my dad and he wasn't there and, you know, I didn't feel loved by him and stuff. And this was a story I told myself over and over again. And it became an issue with even men. I felt like my dad was very hard, that he was very critical, you know, that I was being judged by him for everything. Nothing I could do was right. And it spilled over into relationships with men. And I came to identify that I was able to receive anything from a woman, because my mother and I had an excellent relationship. Any criticism, judgment, suggestions, anything from a woman was no problem. But the minute a man did it, I was being criticized, I was being demeaned, I was being devalued, I was being taken for granted, all of this negative stuff. So
even if it wasn't coming from that place, right? That's
exactly.
The way you experienced
it was the energy, it was
right.
the male energy, and I identified that I was having an issue with male energy.
Right.
You know? So I decided one day, and very intentionally, that I was going to recreate my story. And what I did is I pulled out old photos. And I started going through the pictures. And whatever the first thought that came, if that had a negative emotion attached to it, I changed the story. So for example, we started off in a little bitty house. And my father added on to that house over the years. And so my story then was, you know what? This is what we started out as. But my father was always building. And he was always excelling. And everything that he did with excellence. And so, and he encouraged me to do it because as he was building this house, he pulled me in. That's how I know how to use a hammer. I know how to use a saw. I know how to use a leveler.
Me too.
I recreated the story. These things I hated doing. You know, why you always gotta call me to do it? You can't hire someone to do it. It was like, he called me to do it to teach me how to do these things. That's how I'm able now to get a hammer. That's how I'm able now to rescue a cat out of a wall without the right equipment, with a knife and a hammer. I recreated the story. And as I recreated the story, I was very, very aware of the emotions and the feelings that I had with the things that I said. And if it didn't feel good, I changed the story. And so now I have a new story. Same situation. But I have just, what I intentionally did is I put a new frequency.
Absolutely.
And a new vibration
over it.
On it.
And another thing that what you did very intuitively was aligning with the concept and the truth that the blessing and the curse is the exact same energy. And you decided to go back into that energy and recognize that if the blessing and the curse is the same, then there is no curse.
Right.
And so you went back and recognized, what am I not seeing as the highest truth? What am I not seeing in love? What am I not seeing in light? What is not impregnated in those experiences? I am choosing now from a conscious place to get in partnership with the memory. Because I am the co-creator. And literally I go in and I transmute that. And that's what you actively did.
Right.
You flipped it, but you did it consciously.
And so what I did now, where my story used to be, my father was a criticizer and was hard and didn't love me. My story now is, my father gifted me with his knowledge and his wisdom to prepare me to step into everything that I was created to do. Even this, my father prepared me for this. I learned how to be on a stage because my daddy was on a stage.